Before I make my introduction to the committee, Scrutiny and Policy Overview Committee, I'd just like to clarify a couple of points about some other business that the councillors would be interested in. And Councillor Mrs. Bath wishes to address the committee about the zigzag and issues related to it. On advice from the Chief Executive, we're going to do that at the end of the meeting. So do you have to go? I would suggest if you could give us half an hour, then you'll probably be okay in half an hour's time. Just bear with me from.
On a point of order, Chairman, I believe that the Constitution gives you the right to adjourn the committee for any specified period of time. I believe that we would be operating within the Constitution if you were to adjourn the meeting now for a period of 5 minutes. If members wish to leave and fill their coffee cups up, they can do. If they wish to remain and listen to Councillor Mrs. Bath, that is entirely up to them.
I think under the circumstances, and because Councillor Mrs. Bath does have to move on, I'm quite happy to adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes to hear her what she wishes to talk to us about for regarding the zigzag. So I'd be grateful if we could turn off. Yeah, turn off the media. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's committee meeting of the Scrutiny and Policy Overview Committee. I am Councillor Jameson and I am the chairman of the committee. Members and officers have their names in front of them for ease of reference. In order to assist in the process this evening, I must ask everyone to ensure that mobile phones are either switched off or on silent mode, and we would be grateful if you would remain quiet whilst the meeting is in progress. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be filmed by the Council and broadcast live on the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. If you are seated in the chamber, it is possible that cameras will capture your image. By your presence, you are deemed to consent to be filmed and to the use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. As the chairman of the meeting, I can at my discretion terminate or suspend filming if, in my opinion, continuing to do so would prejudice the proceedings of the meeting, or if I consider that continued filming might infringe the rights of any individual or breach any statutory provision. Finally, there are no planned fire drills for this evening. If the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately via the emergency exit, of which there are 2 in this building. Thank you. Apologies for a slight late start this evening, but we just had some other business to conclude. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies from Councillor Hilliard, who's on other council business tonight.
Okay, declarations of interest.
Not a declaration of interest, Chairman, but for clarity, I'd like it noting, as I have previously done, that I serve on the Bournemouth, well, let's put them in order what their priority is, Bournemouth Pool and Christchurch Joint Committee as a member of the County Council dealing with desegregation issues.
Thank you. Before we progress any further, I was discussing with the clerk earlier on this evening about looking forward to future joint committees, which is something that happens in Pool, I believe. And I just would like to ask Nikki if you could outline some of what you were telling me earlier on, rather than me trying to remember it.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The Borough of Poole Council responds to the joint committee meetings by looking ahead to the next agenda. So they receive the agenda, they set their meeting to fall in between receiving the agenda item and the next BCP joint committee meeting. They meet, look at an item as per the agenda page from Bournemouth. They will then make a recommendation to be taken back to the joint committee and add a comment on it on supporting information. So they're looking forward to the next meeting rather than respective as we are to the last meeting, passing on comments that way.
Thank you for that, David. Vice Chairman, I think you've got something to say on that.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Members will all have a pretty green paper in front of them, and I'm very sorry there's no significance to the fact that it's green, only that I didn't check what paper was loaded in the printer when I started printing. So this is the document that is referred to by the Chairman. This is how Pool have done it. They, as we said, we have the meeting on the 19th of February, which comes to the Joint Committee on the 21st, and it sets out a number of concerns or points that obviously they can be put forward. Now this can be useful, but I feel that we do need also to scrutinise what has gone, because you can look forward, but when the meeting actually arrives, you can find that things change even in that short time. So you do need to look back as well and pass your concerns. What was depressing, and I remember distinctly asking the officer if our concerns if our comments on one of the early meetings had been forwarded, and the officer said yes, they have been forwarded. They didn't appear on any form of report. I gave a report as I printed the minutes of the last Scrutiny Committee meeting where we considered these points and circulated that to the members of the Joint Committee, and I think some were quite surprised to see that we'd actually raised all the concerns that we did. I didn't go through it. I had a comment from the chairman that perhaps I could be brief. I've never heard that before, have I? And as I said, I presented our concerns. One other thing that comes to mind, as members will be aware, this committee, and to be fair, the other committee, decided to proceed basically by means of task and finish groups. Now, from the Local Government Act 1974 onwards, beg pardon, 1972 onwards, there is a presumption that all meetings of the council, of a council and its subsidiary bodies, should be open to members of the public unless there is a good reason for that not being the case. And we've all had experience of pink paper reports on the agenda, and we moved into secret session. It's not that there isn't the technique for doing that for safeguarding confidential business. What I and the leader of the opposition on Pool Council, and I'm very pleased to say our own leader and deputy today, were concerned about, is that this use of task and finish groups, we are not getting to see the papers. We are not getting to see the minutes. Yes, what said the chairman, beg pardon, Councillor Beasley, yes, you have, because the minutes, these are published afterwards. But afterwards is by definition too late. We need to see them as soon as possible. Granted, there will always be confidential items, and one point raised today in opposition to my proposal, which Councillor Brown seconded, was that the individual cases of vulnerable consumers, customers, constituents would be raised and publicised. Well, no, because that's not in there's safeguards against that. As we all know, we've all dealt with this. Cases that individual officers might feel that if you're dealing with, as we will be, selection and so on, that there will be concerns that matters might be raised and publicised. Obviously, no, because that is covered by, as we all know, by the Local Government Act.
David, can I just interrupt you a minute, and just for clarification, can I ask then, my understanding from what you've just said is that the task and finish group will meet and will present their papers to the joint committee, after which those papers will be published.
May be published.
Notwithstanding items that need to be discussed in a private setting.
Items that need to be discussed in the private setting will, of course, remain confidential under the Local Government Act. But the point is, there is this concern that where things could be discussed in public, they're not being discussed in public.
Yeah.
And that was a point I did seek to move a proposal that, unless there was good reason, these matters should be in the public domain, and it was voted down.
Could you, I'm sorry to interrupt the flow of your presentation, but could you give us some examples of matters which are discussed in a task and finish group and not discussed in public session?
I think the matters that are going to be raised are, if you look at the proposals or the minutes, you'll see, for example, that the proposals for the civic structures will be going through a task and finish group. That there will be, I'm just trying to find it in the minutes here, that the task and finish group dealing with the boundary commission's work will be there. And again, the report comes back to the committee.
What was the previous one?
The civic is due to be presented civic structures. There's a structure change order, the electoral arrangements report of the task and finish group for the structural change order.
Are those in this paper that we have?
This was in the minutes of the meeting of the 30th of January.
Okay, I was just looking for some examples.
Yeah, and again, under this was felt to be a matter of concern, and also the wider structure. Nobody wants to go down to individual cases with the desegregation issues, but I think we would have liked more, and this was again a case which a Bournemouth member made, we would have liked more member input.
So may I ask, and I don't wish to go on because we've got business to conduct then, that these task and finish groups are not formed from within the committee?
They are formed from within the committee. A member of each authority serves on them, so that means that our leader and deputy leader have an awful lot of task and finish groups to sit on. But I think the concern that at least two members shared, and I think the leader and deputy, is that this system is there is an impression that something is being concealed.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Leader, I knew you didn't want to say anything.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not going to say a lot on the task and finish groups per se, but the reason they are set up is because there is a tremendous amount of work to get through, as you can imagine, in a very short time. We couldn't possibly have had four branch joint meetings to cover everything. The task and finish groups do report back to the main committee, and I think, yes, it might seem that we're hiding things, but I can assure you the ones I'm on, we haven't hidden anything.
Thank you for that. I think from my perspective is that if somebody was interested in the civic structures, they would want to know when those task and finish groups were meeting. They may wish to attend them, or we as a council may wish to have input. I think that's the point that both the clerk and the vice chairman were making, so that if we felt that it ought to go in one direction, we could say that, rather than having to perhaps say it at the joint committee meeting. Yeah, please.
Back, I think this is where, we're saying that if you read the the agendas before your meetings, then these things can be brought up. And I think these are things that you should be bringing up to the joint committee's attention and saying, because at the moment, members of the public don't go to task and finish group meetings.
Are members of the public entitled to go? Are they open meetings? No. So there is an issue of openness and transparency. It's not a working part.
Well, usually is with task and finish groups, isn't it?
Well, I don't know.
Through you, Chairman, we found out here that task and finish groups are not automatically open to the public.
No. Okay.
But that is no reason why they cannot be open to the public. If it is a matter, and we're dealing with something really major here, we're dealing with the future of the people of this borough, and my feeling is that they should be open so that people can go along, and more importantly, we can see the information on which the decision is made. We do need, because when it comes to the committee, I'm afraid, and other members who've been there will confirm this, there's a dreadful tendency for the chairman to say, do we see this? I propose yes, all those in favour, twang, and 14 hands go up. Now,
I'm sure that's not the case with certainly with members from this.
no, that's what I said. 14 hands go up.
Okay.
6 and 8 is 14.
I'm going to move this forward now because I think we understand what the issues are. Deputy Leader has suggested that from the agenda, which I don't know whether we see or not, the problem is that we want to, I believe, in some cases, to have an input to the task and finish groups, and we want to know what the outcomes were as a result of our input. So, how do we manage that? Chief Executive, would you like to assist?
Thank you, Chair. I tried to resist, but I couldn't. You have representation on every task and finish group, and that's this council's immediate way into the task and finish group. So, for example, if Councillor Jameson's on a task and finish group and sees the papers and wants a wider view of the members of this council in terms of what line she takes, then she would ask you. There is a time issue, so that's not always going to be practically very easy. I accept that point. The timescales that are being worked to aren't designed by anybody involved. They are the nature of the situation that we find ourselves in. But you need to remember that you have representation on every task and finish group, and both the leader and the deputy leader have faithfully attended all of those between them, so you have been properly represented. So that's your immediate way in. The second point, which has been covered off, but just to clarify, the way that the Joint Committee has chosen to allow scrutiny reviews to take place is by having a standing item on every agenda and by inviting the existing scrutiny committees of each of the constituent councils to come forward with recommendations. So that's what's been referred to today, the green piece of paper you have. So the chairman of the Pool Scrutiny Committee presented that at the Joint Committee this morning, and that's become very much the norm of every Joint Committee. For those of you that have attended, you have seen members from both Bournemouth and Poole do that. And I would suggest that that is your best way as a Scrutiny Committee for Christchurch of influencing what goes on in that Joint Committee. I appreciate that you may retrospectively want to look back at the minutes, but if you want to influence what's going to happen next, you have to be looking at the agendas of the next meeting and commenting on them. And the timescales are short, so I think on that particular example, I think the Pool Scrutiny Committee only met on the 19th, and the meeting was today. So you have to move quickly, but that is your best chance to influence what goes on. So some of the points that you've raised about task and finish groups, could they be in public? You can make a recommendation from this committee directly to the Joint Committee, rather than rely on your representatives try to raise it in the meeting when it's not on the agenda. Yeah.
Thank you for that input. I'm just going to sort of work around this a little bit. Is it the view of this committee that we should make that recommendation that task and finish groups should, where possible, be held in public? So there should be public access. Right.
I think it would make it look more open and solve a lot of the issues that get mentioned.
Yes.
Yes.
Anybody against that?
I'm not entirely against, but I do think we are a scrutiny committee.
Yeah.
We're there to scrutinise. After all, here we don't get the agendas of the other committees and then make our recommendations to them.
Yeah.
I'm sure that is against our role. What we're there to do is to look at what has happened. Sure. To scrutinise. So, as far as I'm concerned, this is not scrutiny. It's very useful, but it's not scrutiny.
Might I suggest, though, that we come back to what the Chief Executive has said, is that the Joint Committee has agreed that the scrutiny committees could make recommendations for the agenda of the joint committee. Is that?
And indeed, it's no different than this committee has made recommendations to this council on a number of occasions about many things, because your role is to scrutinise and recommend if it's appropriate. And that's what's happening in the other council areas with Bournemouth and Poole, and it's not happened as yet from here. And I think, as I say, I think that's your best chance to influence what goes on. Otherwise, you'll simply be reviewing what's happened, and it's too late.
Fred?
The only issue I see with that is that I didn't attend today's meeting, but I've attended other meetings, and very often the Task and Finish group present their meeting whilst the meeting's going on.
Yes.
And so we don't really know what is the content until after it's happened. So we wouldn't always get the reports before the joint committee meeting, if you get my meaning.
So the point is that Bournemouth and Poole will make recommendations to the joint committee about what they think is important. We don't. We don't look at the agenda and say we think this is important, therefore we want X, Y, and Z. They do. So put aside the Task and Finish group. Look to how we interact as a council, as a committee, to the joint committee, and we are the only authority that is not saying we think this is important. We're looking at things retrospectively and say that was important. Couldn't we have done something about that? We've lost the chance because we're just having a whinge.
Can I come back on that? It's not a matter about, it is the fact that we do everything in retrospect, but if we don't all, I mean, when I attended one meeting when the council tax examination was being presented, it wasn't presented until 3/4 of the way through the meeting, and no one knew what was in it, and so we couldn't have analysed that. But our procedure here, by the looks of it, is the way it's set up. It says to scrutinise the minutes. We don't need to scrutinise the minutes. The minutes are taken as read more often, but we need to see the actual agenda and the items, the reports.
I'll bring you in, which I will in a moment. I'm probably not expressing this very clearly. So I'll try again. So if Poole Council said through their scrutiny committee, we think it's a good idea for Task and Finish groups to be open to the public where possible. They are looking forward to what's going on the agenda, and in general they think that Task and Finish groups should be open where possible. If Bournemouth said no, we don't, therefore they will say nothing. If we say we think it's a good idea for Task and Finish, we are making recommendations, as the Chief Executive said, as to how they conduct their business in the future. And I'm not looking at the detail, Fred, of what's gone on. I'm looking at the process of how we do business. Does that make better sense? I'm looking for a yes or no here.
It does make sense.
Lisa, and then I'll come back to you, Dave.
I can't see why we wouldn't want to be proactive.
Okay.
Of course, we should be putting recommendations to them if we have the opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you. So my view, my view is that we should be proactive, which means that we need to have a view of the forthcoming agenda, so that we can have some idea of what we're looking at in the future, and that may be something that needs to be pursued. Denise.
This is only the second time I've spoken, Mr. Chairman. Could I just say, yes, I do believe that it's good to be proactive. I'm very pleased to hear Councillor Liesel wanting to take an active part in these meetings. We do need to be proactive, but we also surely need to be reactive, because what people say before a meeting is not always what happens during a meeting. So we need to have two sides of the coin.
And I don't think anybody's going to disagree with you on that. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chairman.
We're going to conclude this.
Just two things. It's been very clearly put that what is said isn't or will happen isn't always what happens, which is why we need to be very vigilant and looking at the minutes and also the reports, because minutes are obviously written, but they don't include an awful, well, there isn't any debate usually, but we have to look at the minutes. We have to have verbal reports from those who are present, because we need to know what they are doing on our behalf. And again, it is depressing, but it's entirely what was forecast, that very often it comes back that there are 14 for and 2 against. And we need to be able to bring that out to note that in our minutes. We also need to look at what's coming forward, and there will be, particularly in March, an awful lot coming forward. But we're actually looking at these, and we're looking at half the picture, because we will see, for example, a report on, where's this one? Disaggregation, and we will be, this is a work stream to consider a report from the Programme Board on progress to disaggregation. Okay, that's fine. But you'll get the report here was about 2-3 pages, item 8, it's item 9, so there were, yes, 11 paragraphs of meat, and that's it. Now, there's a lot more gone on behind the scenes, and I know some of it from talking to county council colleagues, but they are not publishing the papers, and unless I have made a mistake, I don't believe they're publishing minutes or notes of these task and finish group meetings. And again, this is, once the point is, we need that information. Chairman, I do appreciate this, but we do need to look at this and say we have a meeting now on the that is programmed in for the 20th of March, and admittedly we have an ordinary scrutiny before that. We should have an opportunity to consider the minutes from today's meeting, but can we make sure that we do have a meeting? Can we make sure that any comments from today's meeting, and the comments are, I think, meaty enough to go forward? I know they're sent, perhaps it might be best to send them by snail mail as well, because I am very annoyed that they said there's nothing from Christchurch. Well, there was, because I was here sitting there when we said it. So on that point, Chairman, we have to obviously go through the minutes tonight, but looking forward, I think those are points which we really need to consider and to send off to the officers of the Joint Committee as soon as possible. I know our officers have sent them, they've told me they have, but somehow they ain't got there.
Okay, and this is probably what we're discussing now is probably more important than looking at the minutes of the last meeting. So I do want to make sure that we come out of this with a clear understanding of where we're going. My understanding from the discussion so far is that we as a committee would recommend to the Joint Committee that we are making recommendations looking forward to the next agenda, as well as our other function of looking back and seeing what's happened in the past and maybe bringing those comments forward, like you said this, and you know, because they would tie up, wouldn't they? There was a recommendation that something happens and it didn't happen, so we could have a second opportunity to comment. And I think the other point is that the ability to view task and finish groups where possible, and in order to do that, I think we need to have a lot more understanding of when these things are happening, so that we can, if we've got an interest, for example, in boundary structures and civic structures and so on and so forth, that we can individually look at those and say, yes, this is interesting, I'd like to go and have a look at it. But we need to know the information. We need to get the information from the centre to us as members on task and finish groups. So, well, we're recommending that there is an ability to view them. Now, whether that is open to the public or just open to other councillors as observers, I don't know. I would suggest it would probably be easier to be open to councillors as observers rather than be open to the public, because it's a whole different ballgame. So that's my understanding of the discussion that we've had so far. Does that sort of tie in with other people's understanding? Are we content with that as a way forward? I'm looking at the Deputy Leader.
Oh, sorry.
You, in all seriousness,
yes,
you're the one that does all the work. You and the leader.
In all seriousness, I mean, if this is the way you feel, I think the only way to do it is to send, approach the joint committee and say this is what we feel.
Yeah.
I will warn you. There was a disaggregation task and finish group this afternoon after the meeting, and the papers actually came out last night. So we don't have.
No, and I'm not. That's not the point I'm making.
No, but you are saying that it's been nice to see the papers. I mean, on this occasion, we didn't see the papers really before the meeting. I think this is one of the problems.
I think the point I was making is that we have the ability, as a council, to view task and finish groups.
Yes,
and the papers, they won't be out, obviously. Yeah. Okay. Is there any further discussion on this?
I think what people are saying is that because we have one representative on many of the task and finish groups, even if we do put the view forward, we don't always get our voice heard, because the balance isn't, it's not very politically correct anyway, in my view, because there's no opposition. And even on the main committee, when Paul, I believe he's a Labour or Liberal, one of the two, I've been to 3 meetings, he's never been able to get anything through, he's always been voted down. And I see the same with our 2 votes, getting voted down most of the time. So I understand why because of the numbers, but there does seem to be an unfairness. If Bournemouth doesn't like it, Bournemouth won't accept it.
It doesn't happen.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
And I think whilst we have only 2, and we have the 2 spread themselves across all the task and finish groups, it would strengthen our position if we were to write to the chairman of the joint committee and say, we feel this. So that's actually a second voice supporting, or a third voice supporting a point. So you've got nothing to lose, really, in my view.
I mentioned it outside of the committee to people that sat on the committee from different areas like Paul and ourselves, and the answer is you've got your representatives, they can bring it forward, but we don't actually have anything, no guarantee that they can bring it forward, because it's not on the agenda.
But we can bring it forward as a group, and not being flippant about it, but you know what it's like being in opposition when you've got a big group, but you're still here. So Yes,
make
please.
a comment to add to that, because the representation on the joint committee is what it is. It is proportionate to the size of the areas, and that means that Christchurch, unfortunately, is sort of marginalised in terms of numbers. So I would suggest if you're in that position, you maybe need to think about some other ways of trying to get your point across. Now, we've covered off the issue about this committee making direct recommendations to the joint committee rather than just sending you minutes, because today the minutes were noted, and that's what's going to happen, to be honest. They're going to be noted. The other thing to do, or to consider, would be how you can work in tandem with the other scrutiny committees. So Bournemouth and Poole have started to work together on scrutiny, because there's bound to be some common ground. So I would suggest to you that you open your minds up to that as well, and you explore those opportunities with your colleagues in the other councils, because they're carrying out the same function as you are. Because in the areas where you do all agree, then surely that would be much more power to your elbow when that's presented to the joint committee. So as I say, the numbers are what they are, and you won't be able to change that. But just as our representatives on the joint committee try to find common ground with our colleagues in that committee, you could do likewise with your scrutiny colleagues in other councils.
Thank you for that. I was just making a note. So, Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman, and I'd like to thank the Chief Executive for confirming a point I have been hammering away at for the last 2 years. We are going to be outvoted, full stop, end of story. What I would do on the scrutiny point, I am happy to explore, and indeed while I was acting as chairman, I did ask the officer to explore cooperation. But what I do not want to see is a situation where we go and have a joint scrutiny committee where there are 8 members from Bournemouth and 6 members from Poole and 2 members from Christchurch. Again, the Chief Executive cannot concern himself with this because, of course, it is a political matter. But I believe one of the officers of the Bournemouth Conservative Group has suggested that we should form one happy Conservative group. I know that you cannot have a whip on scrutiny, but while I would be happy to participate or see what happens, I do not believe that this committee should stop scrutinising, because there are a lot more people on this committee and there could be a lot more varied views than you would get with 2 members on a joint scrutiny, or even 4 members on a joint scrutiny panel. We've seen these before, and yes, you can say, well, we try and build alliances, but you come up against this block of people who say, well, we're from Bournemouth and we actually think this, because they will have their own views of their interests. Not a party political decision, but they will think, well, this seems to be a good idea to us. You'll have a slightly smaller block of people from Poole who will say the same thing. And we will just wind up, if we stop scrutinising it here, we will just wind up banging our heads on the same brick wall. And I'd make one other point, Chairman, about the references. When we send something, all these points were made and the answer was very simple. Or we'll refer that to the programme board, the task and finish group, whatever. And again, it's shunted out of the way rather than discussed in the joint committee. I think the joint committee has the quickest rate of disposing of items by interest that I have ever seen in my entire career. That had it not been for me and one other being obstreperous, we would have been finished today by 11 o'clock. And that is not what you want. Things are not discussed. As I said, it is like a row of automata. Chairman says, all those in favour, pull it on. And it's not a forum for discussion, it's a forum for implementation.
Sorry.
Go on, Fred.
It's just that Bournemouth and Poole don't have county councillors, but they count all their councillors, and we've got county councillors and borough councillors, and it seems like we're only counting the councillors on the borough.
Counting half of them.
Yeah, we're only counting the borough councillors when it comes to discussions and things like this. We don't know. I know some of them are, well, most of them are all double-hatted, but technically we should be represented with 29 councillors, not 24.
I think not wishing to be Machiavellian, but if we, they have organised this, or this has been organised in on a basis of numbers, and if it was organised on a basis of age, we would have 8 members, Poole would have 6 members, and Bournemouth would have 2 members. That would be interesting, wouldn't it? But I'm going to David. Can I just
relevant to what Fred has just said?
Okay, go on.
Thank you, Chairman. The proposal, the submission to the department, or the ministry as we must call it now, was that the interim executive be formed on the basis 862, that the authority itself, the shadow authority, be all the borough and councillors from each of the 3 boroughs, but no county councillors. Now, apparently, and I have heard about this from county as well as through the joint committee, the ministry has stuck its heels in and said the county councillors will be represented. You will have the 5 county councillors will be members of the interim authority. The county councillors will choose one member, one of them, to sit on the shadow executive, but as the downside of that, instead of saying, well, we recognise Christchurch's position by saying that you will have 1 county councillor and the other 2, in the interests of strict proportionality, it is said they are going to cut back the representation of the borough on the joint executive from 2 to 1. Now, the indignation that flowed around the meeting that the ministry should dare oppose what the committee had represented gave rise to a motion to write to the minister and say, no, this isn't right, we don't want the county councillors there, although we do think we should have 2 members from the borough. I again voted against this, as did others, but unfortunately the God in this case was on the side of the big battalions and we didn't win. But that is the instruction from MCH, whatever, that from the foundation of the interim authority, all the county councillors will be there, but they will have 2 votes, 1 as a county councillor, 1 as a borough councillor, and of course there's no requirement that they must be cast the same way.
Okay, thank you for that. Interesting point, David, but I'm not quite sure if it relates to what I'm trying to cover.
But it was what Fred was saying about
indeed. I think that if we seek to find common ground between the other scrutiny committees, it wouldn't affect what we do here, which is the point that you were alluding to. I don't think it would be appropriate to get rid of this committee because we're going to have a joint committee. That is not what I think is being suggested.
To be clear, Chairman, that wasn't what I was suggesting. I think the joint arrangement would be best for Christchurch if it was a more informal one, as much as you would want to find common ground and try to formulate them into recommendations. Because if you make it formal, the proportionality thing is probably going to kick in. So you would want to have a representative number of you meeting with your colleagues from Bournemouth and Poole to see what common ground there is. It strikes me it's one of these situations where you kind of technically each group has a vote, you know, and as much as you either all agree or you disagree. I can't quite do that in a 3, but you know what I mean. So it wouldn't be about every person in the room having their own vote. It would be, this is Christchurch's position, this is the position of the other 2 councils, can you find some common ground? And you either can or you can't. And that none of that would overtake this committee and its right to make comment to the joint committee.
And I think that would be more of a consensus basis. Yeah, Fred.
I would like to see it politically balanced as well. I mean, Paul.
You're putting your name.
No, I'm not putting my name forward. I'm just saying. I think it. I mean, Paul have got a wider range than what we have here in political balances, and you know, I have seen it in black and white that they didn't think it was, some things weren't required to be politically balanced, that it should all be one lead authority, so, and which obviously I'm against. I like to record that.
Chairman, can I just give Councillor Neil a word of caution that if it is politically balanced, there probably won't be any opposition members. Okay, so just could be careful.
You need to have some political.
If you want it politically balanced, then there wouldn't be any opposition members on the joint committee, strictly speaking.
Thank you, David. I think the point is that the scrutiny committee scrutinises in a way that very often goes against what the council is wishing to do, which is the job of the scrutiny committee. It scrutinises, and I think that the years that I have sat on the scrutiny here, when it was first formed, is exactly what we did. So, and I'm sure that the Bournemouth and Poole committees, because they've got a bigger political divergence, would be more on that basis. But it's not about politics, actually. It's about scrutiny. Does that help? Probably not. No. So I've got my list now, which I think is probably about it, is looking forward, which we've mentioned already, to the next agenda. Looking backwards, we're not going to give up the looking backwards, which we do, and the ability to view task and finish groups as observers from this council where appropriate. And I couldn't see any time where that would be inappropriate, because even if it is confidential, we are all able to look at something confidential in the same as anybody else, and to seek common ground informally with other scrutiny committees. So that's my proposal from the chair. Does that find favour with anybody? Who's going to stick their hand up to second it? Thank you very much. Are we all content with that? Anybody against? That's no con. Thank you. That was a very interesting debate as a prelude to the main business of the evening. So I'm going to the, how is it put in here? Agenda item 3, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Joint Committee. Item 12, apologies. I don't think we're interested in the apologies, are we? Or declarations of interest. Confirmation of minutes. And item 15 on page 6, which is public issues, deputations, questions and petitions. And item 16 is recommendations from overview and scrutiny panels and committees, which is exactly, I think, what you were talking about before. So this is where our block would come in here in future. So does everyone? Yes, David.
Thank you, Chairman. Item 16, recommendations from overview and scrutiny panels and committees. Part 3 on the, I think the third page of the actual minutes. The 4-year election cycle as currently used by the existing unitary authorities remain in place. I actually thought we used the existing 4-year district council elections, but they seem to have forgotten us, which is not surprising. And similarly, Chairman, well, there's another point that I'll be bringing out when we move on, but it's the sort of who are Christchurch, which is a little worrying.
I think, David, this is a recommendation from overview and scrutiny panels and committees, which are the ones from the main authorities, and not part of the business of the joint committee.
But it's just an indication or straw in the wind, Chairman, of the feeling.
I think if Pool Scrutiny Committee decides that they're going to put that in as their input to the joint committee, we could put in our own input to the joint committee. So that is the point, and I think it reinforces, I think, the discussion that we've just had, Fred.
Yeah, I was going to say some of the things that we can't necessarily recommend because it will be the new council that will decide on some of these things, surely.
I think it will be a recommendation to somebody to make that decision. I'm going to turn over to page 8, item 17, which is the electoral arrangements for structural change order report of the task and finish group. I think the challenge here, of course, is that we don't know what column 2 of Appendix A attached to their report says because we don't have the papers. But don't know. Okay. But I think that this task and finish group was chaired by Councillor Flagg, the leader of this council. And I think looking at the decisions made are perfectly sensible. You wouldn't have a new authority without checking the ward boundaries to make sure that they were fair across the piece. So are we happy? We're all content with that? Item 18 then is the structural change order update. David.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Just a point of information on page 5 of the minutes, which is the third paragraph down.
Talking about numbers at the top or the numbers at the bottom?
I've only got numbers at the top, which says V5.
Okay. V5, which is page 9.
The Joint Committee advised that the Dorset Area Committee had agreed the new council should hold all-out elections based on the county electoral cycle of 5 years. That is an unfortunate error. The county electoral cycle, just as ours is 4 years, but what was being done is to adjust the cycle of elections by 2 5-year terms, so that the new county council elected in 2019, if God forbid that goes ahead, members elected in that year will not retire until 2024, and then those members elected in 2024 will not retire until 2029, at which point I will be ceasing to worry about it. But that will then return the county electoral cycle, the Dorset Shire's electoral cycle will then be held, the elections will then be held at the same time as the other county council elections throughout the country.
So it's a harmonisation.
That is a harmonisation. There'll be 2 periods of 5 years of office holding, and then they'll be back to 4 years.
4 years. Interestingly, that the comments that were made from the overview and scrutiny panels and committees weren't reflected or acknowledged in their item of business 18.
What happens?
Yeah. Unless I'm misreading that. So are we okay with that, or do we have any comments on that other than the Vice Chairman's already made? So that concludes, I think, the matter of business for this evening. Councillor Mrs Denise Jones, before we conclude.
Is it permissible, Mr. Chairman,
always
to make
permissible.
a general remark, in that it's my understanding that this meeting was put in as an extra meeting because of, am I wrong?
It's not this meeting, that's the one,
The one
we
we-
haven't got the minutes of yet.
I thought this was the one that started at Oxford.
The one that started at
right.
9 is the next one, which I don't believe we've got the minutes of yet.
Because it only happened today.
But this meeting took 20 minutes. It actually really took almost longer to read the minutes than it did for the meeting to take place. And it seems a sad reflection on democracy to me that you skate through all these things. Right, yes.
As a matter of...
It's not democracy in action.
Thank you for your observation.
Thank you.
I'm
For letting me make
assuming you don't wish me to make a comment on your observation. Deputy Leader.
Can I just say it is democracy, if you will agree?
Thank you for that. The meeting is...
Through you, Chairman, Tammany Hall was supposed to be democratic as well.
The meeting is finished at 5 minutes past 7. Thank you very much for attending.